This video is sponsored by KnucklesOX, Baba Snake, and Julio the Boy. Our story resumes right in what will be the twilight events, right after, or during this world's Super Broly, and just before the events of the Moro arc begin to transpire. From here, Goten, Trunks, Piccolo, and more than likely, from at least time to time, Pan train like they had before, since the boys growing up and balancing other things on top of their development as fighters, much like Gohan once had to do, means they are beginning to face the challenge of mastering balance and priorities, as well as the need to grow to a level to compete and deal with threats operating at a godly level, as they do seem to keep cropping up now more than ever before. This, however, means that the Pan of this timeline would be getting a lot more training and time to play with her uncle Goten and Trunks, accelerating her growth since she's not just training with Piccolo, and the Piccolo she is training with is a stronger version. That said, it also means Piccolo has to be a bit more stern than usual, since he needs to watch for correcting any mistakes or bad habits the boy's lapses in focus may be exaggerating, as passing those down to Pan will be extremely counterproductive. Thankfully, as a blessing in disguise, or maybe as divine punishment, the Namekian actually wasn't quite sure yet. But the duo synchronicity is the one thing that has consistently grown far stronger at a rate that reminds him of a Saiyan power level, with their insane Zenkai boosts and the like, as they've continued to share many of their experiences and feelings with one another, despite continuing to grow as very different people, all while from a young age, taking on battles that threaten to destroy their world and universe. And now, the trials of growing up like Earthlings, with all the complications and oddities that entails. And through it all, Trunks and Goten's bond has only gotten stronger. Thus, even without training it to, their fused power still continues to grow remarkably, in a way that reminds Piccolo much more of the Namekians, or even the Majin, rather than Saiyans here to be quite frank. This discovery is exemplified when on a day when Goten, Trunks, and Piccolo had specifically decided they would not only leave Pan behind to train with Videl and her dojo students after school, instead of with them so they can go all out, as well as the boys promising they would both leave their Watara at home, and refrain from performing the fusion dance during their training, as it was becoming a bit of a crutch or an instant failsafe for the duo rather than an ultimate or emergency technique. The two best friends still found a way to merge themselves somehow. At first, after they warmed up, things appeared to be going well, with signs of improvement already visible. Then when things got serious, well, put bluntly, Piccolo is a Namekian, and a warrior who's fought in many battles he only survived thanks to being able to count on strong allies, would originally think there was no such thing as being too synchronized. But this concept is demonstrated as very much possible when they try to spar, and Goten and Trunks are unable to actually hit each other, instead now beginning to fuse just when they make contact with one another. And most strange of all, it's not truly a fusion, it's more like being smushed or mashed together in a way, into the form of a being who is very obviously neither Gotenks nor Trunten, or even a failed version of either fusion, just a sort of amalgam that is noticeably weaker than the sum of its parts. Thus, it didn't really deserve to be qualified or counted as a fusion. In fact, this wasn't even the kind of beautiful synchronicity the boys were trained to have. It's more like an abomination of it, where they are kind of becoming codependent as fighters, which was never the goal. So even if this mistaken combining technique, which apparently bottlenecks the amount of energy the new being may possess, was actually worth a damn, it would still teach the wrong lesson to actually try to use it, even though by first glance, it is better than Batara and Metamorph fusion dancing, as this state was attained without dancing or the use of the earrings, all because their ki have just become that precisely synced and fine-tuned to one another, the weakness likely lying in there being nothing to regulate or control all that power that's being wasted. And worse, just as soon as it is made, this amalgamated state ends and leaves the two fusees tired and easier to counter and defeat, on account of not accessing any kind of power out, and instead just kind of stalling out. Confused by this, the trio decide to call things for that day of training and attempt to get back to it later. However, this continues occurring for multiple days of training afterwards, without fail, anytime Trunks and Goten come into contact with one another, even becoming more intense, as the boys eventually begin to merge not by trading blows, but by trading or clashing ki blasts with one another. Fed up with this, as this leading to other bad habits like Trunks is overcommitting, and Goten being too relaxed and quick to let his guard down worse, as they aren't making nearly as much progress as Piccolo has become used to with the boys, and his various failed attempts to get to the bottom of this strange crisis have borne no fruit, despite this being quite serious, as it essentially means Goten and Trunks just can't fight in the same vicinity as one another. Getting a bit desperate, Piccolo reasons one of their most logical approaches may be attempting to go back to the drawing board when it comes to the concept of them fusing altogether, rather than looking at it as something to be avoided. This eventually culminates in the decision to try training in the pendulum room again, to possibly investigate if this could somehow have something to do with fusion itself, and thus, they decide to relive the first time they chose to undergo the phenomena, where a strange occurrence happens. Initially, this all goes as expected, with the trio just witnessing the events of the Buu saga again, from a more passive and third-person perspective, and maybe a few chances to fight against the illusions of their adversaries from the time. But eventually, Goten and Trunks accidentally form into that strange combined state again. At the same time, they are revisiting the battle with Super Buu and Trunten. Then, something that never happened in the original timeline, or it's supposed the past, occurs. and right before their eyes too, shockingly, showing himself instantly aware of what's happened, and that they're there watching him as a magically conjured entity. The Trunks of the pendulum room illusion suddenly shows off enough power to effortlessly change his own fake timeline, one-shotting Super Buu with a dodgeball of ki, and turning its sights on Goten and Trunks, as he has always wanted to inhabit the same space as his components, and better yet, to fight them. This very obviously catches the Z fighters off guard, and then does not go well for Goten, Trunks, or Piccolo when Trunks goes after it, since this strange illusion of the Potara fusion seems to have all the power the current version is capable of. And despite the Gotenks-led fusion usually being polite and calm-natured, he seems particularly more rough and ruthless right now. Or maybe that's just how Super Buu felt on the receiving end of this power. Regardless, it becomes clear, as this is no longer a memory, it's more like a confrontation of the true potential of Trunks, or fusion itself. And he was born for much bigger things than just handling Super Buu, or being treated like a common Super Kamehameha. A fierce resolve burning in his aura to prove that fusion is no mere technique, it is an experience unto its own, and that experience must be respected, accepted, and cherished for one to receive its full power. These words do, however, serve as a good excuse for Goten and Trunks to commit a proper fusion dance in order to put the rogue Potara warrior in his place, as Gotenks, the hero of justice, is formed. Now somehow miraculously facing off, despite how impossible it should be, Piccolo begins to stare on unbelievably and rub his temples even harder, as Gotenks and Trunks begin doing what appears to be playing and competing, rather than outright trying to fight, genuinely bending the laws of reality either way though, as Piccolo is still too frozen in his tracks trying to process how this is even possible, and just as he comes up with a theory, the two fusions affect reality so hard that with a stray blow, Goten and Trunks are knocked out of Gotenks, while instead of disappearing, the Metamoran fusion maintains itself, and at the same time, Trunks ceases fighting with Gotenks, and tries to get him on his side actually, revealing that as this is technically his memory too they're training in, he has a good bit of power here, and he won't cease to exist either. And with the bonds of reality being stretched in multiple different directions, a rare once-in-a-lifetime chance now presents itself, as if they can defeat Goten and Trunks, and then escape the pendulum room, they can probably change reality forever, and in the process, swap themselves to Trunks and Goten, making them the fusions, while the two of them get to enjoy everyday life in real training, claiming quite truthfully that with greater potential and focus, they could leave Goten and Trunks to rest as the children they are. While replacing them, Trunks and Gotenks can ascend to the level of gods and gain the power to do whatever they want, whenever they want, with this argument rather quickly winning over Gotenks, who all too happily considers the idea of becoming a permanently existing being, and really ends up liking it. So showing their resolve to pull this off, Trunks and Gotenks also display power over imagination in this space, attaining and utilizing forms and transformations none of them have trained for or shown any aptitude to, or sometimes the forms that nobody has even seen or thought possible, but seemingly showing that the potential for them are at least theoretically real, as we would see glimpses of things like godly forms, and even a bit of the power that Goku was said to display during the Tournament of Power, or maybe even a power that reminds everyone a great deal of Lord Beerus's. Goten, Trunks, and Piccolo fight against the fused warriors as best they can, but the gap in strength remains far too vast. The dynamic and impossible tag team of Gotenks and Trunks presenting the toughest challenge these versions of the characters have faced to date, and in the process, forcing them to adapt and keep up with Piccolo trying to fight alongside the boys, and syncing with them with all he has as well. Eventually though, as the inevitable conclusion that this is a losing battle comes, Piccolo does his best to protect his students, claiming the fusions will have to destroy him first before he allows them to hurt Goten and Trunks. And if there's any parts of them left inside them, they will realize and appreciate that. But as this serious declaration of affection in the bond of master and student is expressed, Trunks and Gotenks begin to break out into hysterical laughter, unable to keep up the air of menace and resolve they were putting on, and thus giving their game away. Slowly realizing this was only a prank, and an excuse for a good spar and some yucks, somehow orchestrated by the fusions themselves, Piccolo and the boys are reminded the illusions of the pendulum room, by definition, can't be real, even if they can be extremely vivid, or mildly manipulated. That said, this experience, and the feelings of Trunks and Gotenks, were very real. They should all respect fusion a lot more, and from more than just one perspective, or else they're gonna squander its power, all of them. Then with one final snark that though Piccolo isn't technically either of their masters by definition, Trunks and Gotenks will both admit it may have been some of his coolness that helped them to refine their own awesomeness. And then with that, the two fusions bid their prank victims farewell and disappear before the environment around them returns to that of the pendulum room. And with it, the shocking discovery that Goten and Trunks' fused forms have seemed to gain some kind of higher dimensional consciousness. which exists even when they aren't actually formed. And that admittedly is also quite intriguing and unbelievable in an endless existential question prompting kind of way for the entire trio. Though once again, Piccolo muses if this seeming impossibility could have something to do with how closely the boys have studied and trained under him as an Namek, since he kinda remembers a familiar feeling during the Tournament of Power. It was only a hypothesis, but maybe through subconsciously witnessing Piccolo syncing with the absorbed and fused essences of Nail and Kami within him over the years, or maybe even their understanding of King Piccolo's birth and reincarnation of Piccolo, Goten and Trunks did what Saiyans do so well and adapted somehow, learning to kind of do so themselves, but to the beings that they had created, being Trunten and Gotenks, and thus making what those fusion illusions said possible. Nah, of course not, right? Regardless, real risk of being replaced by Trunten and Gotenks or not, the results of this training for Piccolo, Goten, Trunks, and even Pan would be very much real and tangible, and pretty profound, more than able to make up for just about any major missed battle experience during the Super Era, which they would have received from not being the most powerful or main fighter in some of the past few crises, due to lacking God Ki, or an easier way to catch up to those who do, with this major progression for Piccolo, Goten, and Trunks being shown off mostly during the Moro arc, where at least 2 out of the 3 would prepare along with the rest of the Z fighters, meaning stronger gains for everyone around, and maybe even hyperbolic time chambers, and could also mean accelerating Goten and Trunks through their growth spurts if they hadn't already had them yet. This means Piccolo for sure is far stronger than he was before, which is really saying something in this universe, as are Goten and Trunks, who would now be involved in the direct frontline battle against Moro and the escaped Galactic Patrol prisoners. That is, if the saga was even able to progress to that stage, as these power-ups do mean the overall saga would be easier to deal with, but it also means giving Moro more energy and power to absorb and be amped by, though in a more interesting way it could be ended than just retreading Goku and Vegeta solving the issue with Ultra Instinct or Spirit Fission. The Moro arc of this timeline, especially after Trunten and Gotenks' prank, would also be a great place to put where Piccolo's orange form is actually discovered, or at the very least set up before Superhero, maybe coming about by Piccolo being present for the events of the battle with Moro on Namek, and thus made to be the best candidate for the base of the Namekians to fuse into, giving Piccolo another solid power-up, and the Namekians as a whole a better fighting chance, thus allowing us to see stuff like the history and connection of the orange form to Namek and its culture and meaning, like the Ajase trees running rather deep and being explored thoroughly. Piccolo could also still lose the initial fight on Namek alongside Goku and Vegeta, even after fusing with others and just assuming the power awakened form, at least if we still wanted to progress the battle to Earth, mind you, allowing Piccolo to stay on Namek to try to repair the damage and connect to his homeland truly as his own training, while for really the first time, allowing Goten and Trunks to prepare for a crisis as adults alongside the other Z-Wars, allowing all these things to culminate. Then, the combined effort theme of the Moro arc that is mirrored from the Cell and Android saga can still kinda shine through here, with Majin Buu, Goku, Vegeta, Gohan, Piccolo, Goten, and Trunks leading the charge and getting rid of Moro forever. Afterwards, the Granola the Survivor arc is too far away from home for there to really be too many changes other than it just being a lot crazier, since the entire universe would be a good bit stronger and further along by now. There is also the fact that if Goten and Trunks were trusted enough in this verse to participate in the Tournament of Power, then there would be no reason to revive Frieza, so the arc actually could not even take place. But if it did, the conclusion of the saga and the final clash with Gas would probably play out fully, with Granola, Vegeta, and Goku teaming up and just barely scraping by, or maybe even whipping out Gogeta again, or maybe a Saiyan X Cerulean fusion. By the way, if that's a concept that interests you, be sure to check out What If Bardock's family survived after this, since that story has a lot more time and budget to explore it, hence the shameless plug. Moving on though, as we simply just don't have that much more Dragon Ball at the time of recording to explore this story, and we did start pretty late in the timeline being post-Cell Saga, Superhero is our next and honestly last point of major intrigue, mostly because things would change a great deal simply because of this version of Gamma 1 and 2, and the fact that they would be stronger and more advanced models if they were based off of this Goten and Trunks, and their antics and battles as Saiyaman X1 and X2 against Dr. Hedo and his schemes, and especially due to the revelation of Gotenks and Trunchen having obtained greater awareness when unfused in this timeline. Thus, the boys would be a bit more thoughtful, enough to include their fusions in the fun, designing Super Henshin Battleizer modes for their costumes, which would then morph them into Saiyaman X3 and X4, though the fusions would have to discuss and argue about which was which. This does also mean Hedo could have reason to either create 4 superhero androids, or install something into Gamma 1 and 2 that would grant them transformations into stronger forms, or copy data from Goten and Trunks to steal their fusion concept even. While in contrast, this Piccolo is also a lot stronger, and keeps getting stronger than his canon counterpart for multiple factors by this point, and in fact, would probably be a match for for the canon Gammas, and even the ones from this timeline, likely just using his power awakened form, since he'd have had it for so much longer and have mastered it long ago, and especially considering that he could have still granted this an emergency and made his wish to Shinron to receive a little extra, allowing him to attain an even stronger than canon Orange form, and or just abuse the fact that attaining Orange during the Moro arc means that Piccolo can get an early start on experimenting and training in Orange to see if it can be mastered, or pushed higher possibly. Now whether this version of Cell Max would actually be stronger to keep up with all this though is a slightly different question, since Dr. Hedo was pretty heavily reluctant in general about making Max, so I could see him not improving it any further than necessary, or to a significantly stronger degree. Not the way he wanted his heroes made as cool and strong as possible to match the X-Series Saiyaman. It's also 100% possible due to all this both Gamma survived in this timeline, going on to join the ranks of the former adversaries turned allies amongst the Z Fighters. Because on top of the entire roster being stronger unlike in canon, the heroes are also benefiting from the help and scaling of a stronger and more reliable Goten and Trunks, who by now would have fully adapted to their growth spurts. The Z Fighters in general would just be a larger roster with people like Tapion, Zangia. I mean, at one point I kind of implied the rest of the Herogens would kind of be redeemed or maybe turn good, so you kind of could just do that here. The androids, Majin Buu, a stronger Videl, and now the Gammas. Also again, this version of Pan, who would simply just be a monster. Oh, and then Broly and his gang too, and honestly probably Granola as well. And because of Trunks and Gotenks' view of things, one could even count the fusions. It's also less likely, mind you, for Goten and Trunks to fail their Metamor and fusion dances, and even if that risk remains, they could always use Potara, or maybe even the fusion buffs from the Demon Realm, to completely bypass that skill check. And not to mention, Beast Gohan would still be fully possible here, and there wouldn't be any major need to use the scheme of Pan as motivation. Beyond that, because she could also likely already be able to fly and a great deal stronger than her canon self, Pan would also just be in less danger overall. So even if I were to amp him and maybe even allow for a perfect Cell Max, in this timeline, superhero, though it's interesting, is still too easy to actually deal with, moving us nearly instantly into its epilogue depicted by the manga, with Goku getting curious about the other Z Fighters' training, and bringing everyone, likely including a great deal of names who originally didn't go, like Pan and the other Z Fighters I mentioned for example, to Beerus' planet, in order to test their new forms and power in what are meant to be very simple, friendly, and casual spars. However, the stakes and intensity would be a lot higher, as on top of the canon matchups we received, like Goku testing the power of Ultra Instinct against Beast Gohan, we could also see a lot of other crazier dream matches just for the hell of seeing, like that rematch of Gogeta and Trunks for example, though this time at a far higher level. Since being competitive, we could see them using things like the dreaded concept of an Ultra Ego X Ultra Instinct fusion, as you most certainly couldn't put that past this version of Gogeta. While in contrast, having witnessed them, I wouldn't put it past Trunks being able to pull off another copied first-time transformation that should largely be beyond him, but somehow he attains, in order to take on a beastly orange Trunks or Gotenks transformation, as they've now reached a height of synchronicity that allows them to swap between their fusions before the timer wears out completely, virtually giving the boys a way to remain fused forever by force of will, and even allowing them to show off things like Gotenks finally figuring out how to pull off his own ultimate form. Ramping up even further, Gohan could finally find his own fusion partner in Broly, and Trunks could cut loose, adopting a great deal of the more creative techniques of his fusion brother, like the Super Ghost Kamikaze attack for example, eventually leading up to a battle royale involving the fusions of Goku, Vegeta, Trunks, and Goten, alongside the newly revealed wrathful beast Brohan. And while at it near the end, and just to be more extra, because of having learned the spirit fission technique from Vegeta, and wanting to know how strong all the Universe 7 Namekians could be together, after facing Moro, Salnel, and Melina, Piccolo could just as easily visit Namek really quickly, in order to fuse with all his people, and make a completely unified Orange Piccolo, since after helping Goku and Vegeta to rein Broly in, but not fighting the Wild Saiyan himself, as well as wanting to test the power of Gohan's rage boost feeding into Broly's wrath, but also simultaneously not wanting to let things get out of hand, as that just sounds dangerous, Piccolo and everyone else simply can't help themselves. And as it turns out, it was dangerous for all these fighters to go all out against one another like this, as they'd very much be beginning to approach gods of destruction fighting each other realms of power. Thus, in this timeline, the hiatus of Dragon Ball after the events and manga finale of Superhero could easily be explained by this crazy-ass sparring session doing a lot of damage to the universe, and quite possibly putting it at risk by destroying it, thus a hiatus of the manga. That is, if one needs a reason aside from the tragic passing of Akira Toriyama himself, putting the universe at risk or even destroying it, and thus leading to Whis needing to perform a temporal do-over, and Beerus to single out and lecture Piccolo, Goten, and Trunks as the ringleaders of all the insanity going on in this wacky universe. In all seriousness though, I hope you didn't mind me devolving into inane rambling at the end of the story, as I do believe the overall outcome of a timeline where Piccolo, or really anyone, spent any significant time and effort to train up Goten and Trunks, while interesting and very fun, would in the end more than likely result in a somewhat idealized timeline, kinda like this one. This one's a bit extreme, but idealized nonetheless. Could it be a bit more grounded if it maybe wasn't such a fusion and transformation bargain sale? Yes. But I digress. You wind up with a cast of characters so strong, they can put their own universe at risk with the strength of their undisciplined fused powers. But that, however, would also give them a higher height and a more perfect balance to try and achieve by going even further beyond together. And that's where we'll be ending this story. I hope you enjoy. Let me know what you thought and what stories you're looking forward to next. As always, take care of yourselves and the world around you, and go beyond plus ultra. I'll see you guys next time on Dragon Ball.